everybody, Eve Harow on Rejuvenation, the Land of Israel Network. It is deep into our Israeli summer, July 28th, 2020, the 7th day of Av, 5780. And as always, this time of year, we are also deep into reflection. It is towards the end of what we call the 9 days. Difficult days. We all also try and stay a little low and close to home. It's days where usually wonderful things don't happen, and culminating in 2 days with the fast of the 9th of Av, where we commemorate a lot of the catastrophes, although certainly not all that have befallen the Jewish people, specifically the destructions of both temples, the first temple in minus 586 by Babylon, the second temple in 70 by Rome, and a lot of other things, Inquisition, and a lot of other things that can be connected to this date or near this date. For me personally, 15 years ago, this date became seared into my brain and my heart and my soul forever. I had moved down to Gush Katif, to Gaza, to the Jewish communities for a few months. There had been a very long and, as it turns out, unsuccessful attempt to get the Shomron government to repeal their evil decree, there's no other way of putting it, of destroying the communities there and, of course, removing all the Jews living there, and as well as in the northern Shomron. And it all came to a head during this time. Now, I had for years gone down to Gush Katif, never lived in Gush Katif, but that was our vacation place. There was a beautiful hotel there in the Beit Kalim. We had many friends there, and we would go for Shabbat, and we would go for holidays, we would go for trips. So familiar with the place, loved the place, and had made friends over the years. And one of the people that I had brought groups to over the years, and grew celery, among other things. And she's with me today on this podcast, Anita Tucker. Hi, good morning.
Hi, Eva. Good morning to you too.
And Anita knows that I still can't eat celery without thinking about her, because if those of you who are watching this on YouTube, you can see the picture behind Anita of her and her hot houses, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Grew like meter long, which is 3 feet long celery, amazing celery, and it's still like my connection to her. But Anita, I'm sure most of my listeners have heard about you or from you over the years. As it happens, you were one of the only native English speakers in Gush Katif, and so a lot of press has come to you over the years, and you've really become somewhat of a spokesperson also for the communities. Before the expulsion, I will not call it a disengagement, before the expulsion and afterwards. So I know that many people have heard of you, but still, for those who haven't, a little bit of how you ended up and when in Gush Katif.
Well, my husband and I came in Aliyah in 1969. I was pregnant with my first child, and we didn't move to Jerusalem or Tel Aviv. We wanted to do the really Zionist thing. We moved to Beersheba. We lived in Beersheba for 7 years, 3 children later. And then we were teachers. We said, oh, we're going to be farmers. Let's be farmers. Of course, a girl from South Brooklyn has no idea what it means to be either a guy from Cleveland, but decided we were going to be farmers. And we went to the Ministry of Agriculture, and they gave us a list of places that are absorbing young families. And the one closest to Beersheba was this place, 45 minutes drive, they said. I had never been there. In Gaza, they were going to build 3 towns in Gaza that were going to connect from Egypt to Ashkelon along the geographical natural border of Israel. And so we drove down there to see the place, and we dumped the 3 kids in the car, about 6, 4, and 2 or something like that. And we get there and we get out of the car, and I look around and all I see is sand dunes and more sand dunes. And I say to Stewie, let's get out of here. Are we crazy? Israel coming to Beersheba sometimes seemed crazy enough. And this was just too crazy. But the kids, my old story, the kids took some garbage bags, plastic garbage bags out of the trunk of the car, climbed up the highest sand dune and kept slipping down, and finally got to the top of the sand dune, sat down on the plastic bags, and in 1 second they were down at the bottom of the sand dune with the warm, fine, beautiful, so special sand hugging them. They came to us and they said, this is home. We're staying here. The beautiful sea, sliding down the sand dunes. We're staying here. And because of that, we ended up living almost 30 years in Gaza, in Gush Katif. And I'm longing for home.
You know, just to give my listeners a little bit of the background, between 1948 and 1967, Egypt controlled Gaza, made it basically into a big refugee camp. Nobody said anything. And then in 1967, in the course of the Six-Day War, Israel takes over Gaza. And so you come into a place where, with not a few Arabs there, with a very deep Jewish history, though, I want to add that. I mean, we have records from rabbis and people who lived there and synagogues that were found in Gaza. It wasn't this foreign place. But certainly, before 1967, there were no Jews living there. Did you have any feeling then in 1979, like despite the kids and the sand dunes, and I have to say, because I have some of the sand here in my house, I took some sand home with me. It's the finest sand I have. It's soft. So sand can be soft. It's soft. So I get the kids. But was there any idea in your mind, Zionism and making Aliyah, wanting to be pioneers aside, that maybe this was an area that was going to be controversial, you know, that things weren't going to work out? We're talking about a lot, you know, there's a different wave in Israel. There's a lot of settlement in Judea and Samaria, and the Galilee also. There's a lot of people going out and doing things. But was there like a little voice in your head that said, I don't know?
Well, you know, when we came the first time, and that was in 1976, actually, when we moved there.
Oh, 76, excuse me, yeah.
If we would have read a little bit more, we would have known that there was a lot of terror there. I mean, once in a while we had heard, but we were like so innocent. We came there, and when we came there, you know, the Arabs welcomed us. They just appeared, and you know, it was I always say it's before the times of peace, when maybe we would have been intimidated by Arabs coming towards us, but it was before the times of peace.
So there was coexistence, because you didn't have these stupid political processes. Yeah.
They were very nice. They came with bread and salt, and they said, welcome, we're so glad you came here. We're going to have some work finally, because their situation was financially and every other way was terrible under the Egyptians. And they were so glad that maybe there were going to be some people coming and there'd be some work.
Which there was.
And
yeah.
They were lovely people, and they welcomed us, and we had wonderful relationships with them, up until the time when people started talking about peace. And I always say, peace in Hebrew, we say shalom. Shalom is something that makes us shalem, more whole.
Right.
But somebody misspelled it, P-I-E-C-E instead of P-E-A-C.
Mm-hmm.
The tourist. So until then, we had wonderful relationships with our Arab neighbors. And also, I think one of the main things that people just have no realization, and very often you hear discussions now this week, so many experts about everything are discussing it, and like they're totally forgetting the geographical situation of the Gaza Strip. It's
right.
this strip of land right next to the sea, right next to the towns of Netivot and Ofakim, the Negev of Israel, and it's a hand stretch like from those places. It's just naturally, geographically the part of Israel. So to make it some kind of a foreign country away is just faking it out. It's not the people. So we were really happy, and they were happy, and the government of Israel, Yitzhak Rabin, encouraged us to come very much. He even stood up against some of his military advisors and encouraged us to come there and develop agriculture there. So he even came to the ceremony that, you know, made the official towns. He came
right.
there. He spoke to us and said that we would be an integral part of the state of Israel, the land of Israel, and we believed every word he said.
Right, so you didn't go like thieves in the night. There was complete and utter government backing for what you were doing, for the communities you were setting up. And I think that's important for people to understand. Yeah, this was totally legal and backed by everybody. And then you're talking about the Labor Party. You're talking about the Israeli left at the time. So, yeah. Different than today, yeah.
We know we'd even go shopping in the Arab towns. Like I would put my baby, I had a new baby then, I put her by the greengrocer store, the vegetable store. He would watch my baby, he was a really nice guy. And I would go shopping to the other stores. or into Gaza City, you won't believe what beautiful dress stores they were in the Christian neighborhood. Of course, the Christians have been all since chased away, but there were many
And the
Christians.
Muslims, by the Muslims, yeah.
They were living and they had a beautiful neighborhood, and we would go shopping in the stores there. And
Mm-hmm.
but there was this guy named El Kayam who came down to visit us before we had houses. That we were living in Kfar Darom, which is a little bit further into the Gaza Strip. And he said, I've got to take you to Gaza City to see where my family lived for generations. And he took us into Gaza City. Of course, you know, it was before the times of peace, so it wasn't a problem.
Right.
And took us to this old neighborhood of these old stone houses with arched doorways, and you could see exactly where they had pulled out the mezuzah because it was built into the stone.
Mm-hmm.
Let's knock at this door, and we knock at this door, and this old Arab woman, he told us that he lived in Gaza, his family lived there for generations.
This Jewish family till when, 48?
Till 1929, his family,
The riots, yeah.
29, the British convinced him to leave just for a short time. They were taking, he was about 6 or 7 at the time. They would take them out for a short time because of the murders and everything that were in Hebron
Right.
and Jerusalem. They were going to take them out to make sure nobody would be hurt, and then go back home. And so that's when he left his home, whose family was there for generations. And he took us to this house. We knock at this lady, a very nice Arab lady, invites us in, makes us coffee. We're talking, and he asked her, "How did your family get here?" And she says, "My family came here from Saudi Arabia in 1929. We came to Gaza, and we were looking for a place to live. And everybody told us that the Jews fled, and they're not coming back, and just choose any house you want." And somehow we ended up in this house, and we've been living there ever since 1929. She said I was about 6 or 7, just the same age as El Kayam was. And El Kayam says, "You know, I know this was my family's home for generations." And you could feel his longing for home in his voice, and it was really something. And he took us to the next door, and it was also an arched doorway. And you also see where the mezuzah was torn out, and the doors were open. It was a mosque, and there was a beautiful mosaic floor, and on it was a picture of Moses and the burning bush, and a picture of David and Goliath, and all the stories of the Tanakh of the Bible were on the floor of this
Mosque.
It was a mosque, and
Right.
El Kayam says to us, "This was my cheder. This was my Talmud Torah. This is where I learned Aleph Bet. This is where I learned to read Hebrew." And you could hear in his voice his longing for home. So I tell this story because I want people to understand that it's legitimate to long for home, and it's not something political. And it was okay for El Kayam to long for home, even though there were Arabs there now, and for Anita to long for home too. And I really do long for home. And I think in these days of the destruction of the temple, we can talk about the destruction of the temple, or we can talk about how beautiful the temple was. And if we talk about how beautiful the temple was, and the amazing thing of the sacrifice of the Tamid, or that there was this Lishkat Gazit, there was this office where when the rabbis would go in there, they would get an inspiration and know exactly what the justice was and what truth was. They didn't need to. So the same thing, when you think about the nice things, then you yearn for home. And that's how I feel about my home in Gaza for 30 years, where most of my children were born. I remember all the beautiful things and nice people, and it makes me yearn for home. And I think it's right to yearn for home. It's legitimate. It's not political. And Jews can live everywhere as other people can live everywhere.
So there are a couple of points. One is that most of the world would say it wasn't your home. The other people there were the indigenous people, but even the story you told us, about the Jews who were taken out in 29, and the British did that to the Jews in Jerusalem and all over the place during the Mandate period, said, "Oh yeah, you're coming back," and of course never did. And then these are places that people will now say, these are Arab places, and they always have been, because they don't know what you just said. So there's that point. But also there is the incredibly still open wound point, is that when the temples were destroyed and the other calamities happened to us, it was enemies coming in, or what the rabbis will say, it was because we had lost the right, let's say, to have the second temple because of internal hatred, and it wasn't representing God anymore because our behavior, we didn't deserve it. And what happened 15 years ago in Gush Katif, though, is something perhaps without precedent that a Jewish government or Jewish leadership did to its own people. This wasn't that we had Egyptian soldiers that came in and took over Gaza Strip or Hamas or anything like that. This was a decision made by the Shomron government, elected to do the exact opposite, for those who don't remember, elected on a completely different platform, who even when there was a referendum, he ignored his own party, he fired ministers who came out against it. It was the complete antithesis of the democracy that everybody is always yelling and screaming about, especially these days, and I'm gonna get political now, Anita, because it's in my throat. Everybody, the left now in Israel yelling, oh, there's a danger to Israeli democracy, but they trounced, spat on, and even worse, Israeli democracy 15 years ago in order to remove other Jews from their homes and in order to make Gaza, as we say, Judenrein. And that, you can hear it in my voice, and I know that you try and stay positive, and that's one of the most amazing things about you, and it's a lot of chutzpah for me, who didn't lose my home, who loved Gush Katif and used to come there, but as a visitor and as a friend, not someone who's lived through what you have lived through. And for me, it is really an open, bleeding wound, what happened, and the hatred of other Jews for what happened there. And of course, the result, which is, it didn't even get us anywhere near peace. As a matter of fact, we have a terror state now, just a few miles out of Tel Aviv. So how have you come to a place where you can sit with this, still remain so positive, which is this incredible, and that's why I really encourage my listeners, next time you get back to Israel, go visit Anita, just because she will make your day. But how do you get through this with, you know, especially at this time of year where it all comes back out, not that you don't live with it every single day, but because the 9th of Av, the expulsion started the next day, and I was in Gush Katif, I was in Beit Kalim for the prayers on the 9th of Av, and prayers when you know a destruction is looming over your head are a very different kind of prayer service than the usual. How do you go on with this? How do you stay so positive? How do you pick other people up?
Well, first of all, I never spoke about this side of it until about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, and even then I hesitated. But today I speak about it openly. I spoke in a forum of some kind of a political forum that discussed the historical, etc., in Bar Ilan University of the Bessa Center, it's called. And
right.
I chosen to speak with Dov Weissglass, the advisor of Arik Sharon, and Gershon Cohen, and other people that were involved in this disengagement, as it's called, the expulsion of the Jews from Gush Katif. And I was really in shock because I hesitated to say things that I knew were true, terrible things. And I saw that these people had no hesitation to say it and to say that they would do it again. And I was in total shock that they had no hesitation to say that they would do it again.
Gershon Cohen said he would do it again. He was the commander of the army, right? He was the general who oversaw the whole business.
Of the
right.
It happened.
Yeah.
And all of them spoke about what happened. And it was so obvious that the motivation of the people like Dov Weissglass and Omri Sharon and many of the people that were pushing this thing forward was to rid Israel of anything Jewish, anything Zionistic, anything, it's what we're all about. They were against it. They want Israel to be a country like all other countries. They have a hatred for the Jewish background. They have a hatred for anything Zionistic. And as a tour guide and someone involved in archaeology, you know better than I do that the whole reason that we're here is because our connection, everything we find here has to do with our Jewish history, with connection with everything that happened as a Jewish people here in Israel. So when I understood that this really was their motivation, I finally understood the horrible things that they did that had no connection with reality. And today when you hear experts speaking, again, they don't always tell the truth. They say, why was the government so anti the settlers? Why did they make the media be so anti the settlers? But the things that they did were truly cruel and crazy. One example is when we would come home to Gush Katif in the days right before the expulsion, they would close the gate, and then suddenly everybody would be waiting there with their cars, and lots of kids, youth that were coming home from wherever they were coming home, And then suddenly you'd see thousands of these black dressed
Right.
soldiers. They were very tall, big, kind of a special unit of soldiers, and they would come with these big sticks, and they started hitting the kids for no reason. And this was something not normal because we're quite a democratic country. We're a wonderful democratic country, and here something very undemocratic was happening that made no sense. And afterwards, people didn't want to talk about it. They doesn't talk about it because you love your country. You don't want to talk about these things. But this is something that was done. It was done as a, not to hurt these kids necessarily, but as a pressure on the people of Gush Katif to leave easily, so that this whole idea would happen quickly. And what Gershon HaKohen said, and I don't think that he was interested in necessarily in taking away the Jewish, but he was doing his job, and he said, I did it like a Russian. This Russian soldier in 1890, I don't know exactly where, he did it according to some system, and I did it so well, I finished it in a month, and they finished it in a week. They thought it would take a month to take all the Jews out of Gush Katif, and I managed it in a week. And if I had to do it again, that's how I would do it again, because I'm doing my job as a soldier. So I think that's one thing that we have to know. Also that the media, that as many PR companies that we could pay for to tell our story, the government and Weissglass, Omri Sharon, and the others were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on PR. They were paying PR companies to make sure that their story got into the media and not only ours. And one example was that people were complaining about, they were so anti the settlers in the media that it was really not right. It wasn't democratic. So one of the Israeli newspapers, Yediot Achronot, decided that they were going to have every day a little story about one of the settlers in a nice way. And it was a small box on the bottom of the page. And one day they came from Yediot Achronot to interview Anita Tucker in her garden on a little table and chairs with her grandchildren, smiling. Everybody's sweet with grandchildren smiling. And that was going to be the story, how I was a grandmother and how I was with my grandchildren. And it was going to be and it was in the paper the next day in a little box, but on the side of the paper, on the other side of this paper of Anita Tucker smiling with her grandchildren, was a picture of a Rottweiler dog with his fangs hanging out. Huge
oh my God.
And it said, apparently the settlers are planning to raise dogs to attack the soldiers. Of course, there was no truth in that whatsoever, but they paid a PR company to make sure that this was going to be on the same page as this was on the same page. So I think that we can keep that in mind. And we can also keep in mind that when the Department of the Settlement of Israel, of the Jewish Agency, tried to make a plan, really, in the encouragement of some of the people from Gush Katif, a plan of how to resettle if this was going to really happen. We were going to protest and do all we could, but if this was going to really happen, the Knesset approved it, then how would we take all the people of Gush Katif and put them in a new place together, just as they are now, like, copy paste. And there was a plan made by the settlement department in the sand dunes of Nitzanim, in that area. They were even going to take part of they had a problem with the turtle preservation area, how they were going to limit it, make it smaller, and all sorts of solutions of how to do it exactly. And they had a beautiful plan of how to do it. And some of these planners went to Omri Sharon and Weissglass to try to present this program as an option for how to resettle the people of Gush Katif if this thing really happens. And I heard from a first-hand witness that Omri Sharon said, "Are you crazy? Why would we want to do this? We want to disperse them in every direction." So there was something behind all this talk. But it's sad, it's not right, and it's continuing today. We see the thoughts of not respecting the Sabbath, not respecting Zionist symbols, hatikva, little flag. And it doesn't interest me very much, really. It doesn't, because I yearn for home, and my yearning for home, for the beauty of Gush Katif, for the fact that it's part of the land of Israel, it's part of the inheritance of the tribe of Judah, and that's where I lived for 30 years, and a lot of my children were born there, and I really hope that my great-grandchildren were born there, and I still do. I think it's the right solution. It's a geographically part of Israel. The poor, I mean, we have to save the Arabs from the Arabs, if you forgive the expression, because what the Hamas is doing there is just yesterday there were people speaking at Merkaz Katif about these experts on the Gaza, on the terror in the Gaza. They were saying that the Hamas is the most cruel regimen that there has ever been in the world. They're really cruel to the people there. Most of the people that we knew had been killed off, tortured. People there are not making a living in any way. They're really in bad shape. A lot of people are trying to get out. They just don't have the money, but they try to send at least one child out so that perhaps he can raise money and bring them, like in the old days when people were trying to leave Europe. Because it was because of the terrible terror and cruelty of the Hamas regime. So I think it's, from every point of view, it's the most logical solution, and people just don't realize that this tiny strip of land right near us, and it's the sea in us, and it's just so crazy that it should intensify as a cruel enemy country.
Well, when you care about the little people living there, which you obviously do because you lived with them, you were friends with them, you worked together, then it's a whole different perspective than what most people are thinking and talking about Gaza as this big open air prison that Israel is, using like a concentration camp, and either not wanting to hear the truth or knowing the truth and lying about it in order to make Israel look bad. That Hamas has been the worst thing that ever happened to Gaza. And as you said, Muslims against Muslims and against Christians and against Jews. And it is a problem that they're not going to be able to solve and the world is not going to be able to solve. And throwing money there isn't going to help anything, because Hamas takes the money to build tunnels to come into Israel and kidnap more Israelis or soldiers, or the very rich people there take it for themselves, and then the little people don't have what they want to have. I wanted to ask you, did your kids all stay in Israel after this? Because, I interviewed Sarah Etzny Cohen, the journalist, on a webinar for One Israel Fund a few weeks ago. And one of the things that she said is that what happened in Gush Katif put aside forever the lie that the right wing is violent. There's this kind of idea in the country, right? The left wing, in between hugging trees and eating granola bars, are just peace-loving people, something that if you're following the very violent demonstrations in Jerusalem, you can see already that it's not true. And that the right wing, mainly because of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, is violent. And here you have thousands of people being taken out of their homes, losing everything, and not being violent. And there was a worry that people would fight against the soldiers coming to them, or physically fight against what was happening. And it didn't happen. I was at the Kotel when you were taken out of your home and put on a bus and then was taken to the Kotel. And I was at the Kotel with many other people that day watching you come off the bus. And you just, there was such a palpable sense of grief everywhere. And what I was thinking is, I'm not so sure, as much as I love Israel and as big Zionist as I am, if I wouldn't have left the country after this, if I would have said, I can't deal with this betrayal from my own people and my own government. Yet that's not what happened in the main. Your children are all here. And how about serving in the army? I mean, here you had a situation, as you described, where with soldiers who came to take people out of their homes. And there were some people who said, that's it, this is not my army. This is not my army. And you had tremendous, wonderful soldiers coming out of Gush Katif. Other things that were happening, for example, I was at the cemetery in Gush Katif the day before everyone was reinterred, the last Memorial Day before this. I went down to Gush Katif. I couldn't think of any other place I wanted to be. And later on, rabbinic dispensation was found to reinter the graves, which is something you really, really try never to do in Judaism. It's got to be a huge reason to dig up a Jewish body and move it somewhere else. Definitely from one place in the land of Israel to another place in the land of Israel. It's one thing if it's, from some grave somewhere in New York and you want to bring to be reunited with the family here, but from Gaza to Jerusalem, yet rabbinic dispensation was found for that also. It just seems like the leadership on all different levels failed many of us. How has your personal family, because I know that there are other families who did not recover from this, and high rates of alcoholism and cancer and everything that you would expect that would be the norm for people who have been completely devastated, lost their income, lost everything. Yet your personal family, let's talk about Anita Tucker, and I think my listeners will understand why you're so special. What happened with your kids and your grandchildren? Where are they now in Israel?
Well, three of my children live here in Netzer Hazani with us. Lots of grandchildren. My great grandchildren, the family live in. One family lives in Talmon, which is also in the Benjamin area of Israel, and a granddaughter who's married lives in Beersheba. She's a social worker, caring about the people of Israel very much, and they hope also to be able to move to somewhere where they can contribute the most that they can. I think it's true of all the families, even in families where people left temporarily to other countries. They all came back when we built again. They needed a breath, but they all came. And guys that didn't go to the army right away back because they just couldn't because of the soldiers with the flag of Israel and the symbol of the menorah of the temple that took them out. They have all gone back to being in the army and in the best units. It's our not going to let anybody take the state of Israel away from us. And I think that's the bottom line. These people who want to destroy the Jewish and Zionistic nature of Israel and want us to be a country like all other countries, it's our state as well. And we want it to be Jewish and Zionistic, and we can't give up on that. So I think we can't afford to give up on that. And I think that what's amazing is that the third generation are, on the one hand, confused. Where is home? Is this my home? Is that my home? In English, you have two words, house and home, but in Hebrew, there's only one word, bayit. And it's like the people all over the world for generations were living in all sorts of countries. Sometimes they were wonderful, settled in, wealthy, good business people, but they were always yearning home, for the bayit hakadosh, the big, beautiful home, house.
Israel.
In Israel, in the Jerusalem, and the temple. And the same thing here, people are, the third generation says, is this my house? Is that my house? Is that my house? But they know that they yearn for this part of the land of Israel that is their roots, that they would like to be able to show the second generation would like to show the third generation their homes, where they grew up, where they went to school, where their playground was, where they slid down in the sand dunes. And it's a yearning for the part of Israel. It's not a yearning for a place that could be anywhere in the world. It's the yearning, the feeling of yearning and the closeness and the desire to go home is a desire to go home to your part of the land of Israel that God promised to the people of Israel, and as an inheritance to the people of Israel in the promised land in this part of the tribe of Judah. So it's not just anybody chased out of their home in another place. It's something that really has an internal and external feature to our lives, and that's how my children are as well. And this, on Sunday, we're having a special program. Of course, today it's a Zoom program in our own community. We built up a few, and it's a positive. Our efforts are in making the third generation know all the symbols that were in our canons of Gush Katif, and that they're going to yearn for them and know about them and love them and want to go home. They're going to be the first ones at Kisufim going in. We took them once on a trip to Kisufim, and we showed them the way home. And now they've built from the Jewish National Fund this beautiful, gigantic, the climbing up thing where you can climb up,
right,
and view the sea.
Like a viewpoint tower, right.
That too is a symbol of yearning for home. It's a physical symbol, but it helps you yearn for that part of the land of Israel. So logically, this is the natural border. Logically, these poor Arabs that are being oppressed. Logically, but inside your soul and your heart, you yearn for all the parts of the land of Israel. And I have no doubt, without any doubt, that sooner or later, and I hope it will be very soon, they're going to have to clean up the Gaza Strip, and they're going to have to call for Jews to come back and build in Gaza. And I hope that it'll be in my time, and I'll be the first in line. So I'm going to be the first in line. This lady, Dikla Gal-Aid, you must know her. She came to take a movie of my curtains that I have with the picture of the sea in my kitchen.
Right.
Yeah. So, I said, I'm going to be the first in line. She said, oh, you better hurry, because it's the same thing that Brian had told me, this person told me, everybody's telling me they're going to be the first
in line. They're running in. They're running.
Going to be the first in line. But it's things that we educate our children to. and we believe it's part of the education that Jews gave to their children for generations, and it hasn't changed.
To never forget. Look, I live in Gush, which is a region that was decimated in 1948. The communities here, many of the people murdered after they surrendered the day before Israel was declared a state. That's why it's Israel's Memorial Day, because of what happened here in Gush Etzion. And you had the same thing where people said, I'm going to go home. My father was killed there, but I'm going to go back. And it took 19 years, from 1948 to 1967. But the children did come back, and people thought they were crazy as well. What are you talking about? There's another country occupying it. But they came back, and now we have beautiful, flourishing communities here. So keeping that in mind, it is what you're saying is not far-fetched. I think it's in the heart of many Israelis that one day a very difficult decision is going to have to be made to clean up the terror states that Hamas has imposed on Gaza, whether it's to help the people there, whether it's because they keep attacking Israel and make life untenable for so many people in the area. But at some point, something's going to have to be done when we have leadership that feels it. But there's going to have to be a price to be paid, and that's, I think, what's keeping people very wary. And because soldiers will have to pay with their lives for this horrible mistake that was done 15 years ago, and that's not something that anybody's rushing towards in any way, shape, or form.
People in Netivot and Ofakim, you've got to all leave, we've got to move the border further in.
Right, because they get bombarded and slammed whenever Hamas feels like it, and running to miklatim and living under just a horrible situation. But I think what happened 15 years ago gave us a deeper understanding of these 9 days and of Tisha B'Av, because when we lived in the diaspora, Jewish communities, we only had each other. There's waves of pogroms and there's this and there's that we have to get through all the time. Not everybody survives it, and horrible things that happened. But the community stayed together, and for the most part, Jews supported Jews. And to look back and say 2,000 years ago, Jews were fighting Jews, what was going on here? How can that possibly be? Well, the rabbis might have been exaggerating. But they weren't exaggerating. And you can see it even before the destruction in 70 with the Maccabees, with the Hashmonaim. A lot of people forget that in addition to the war with the Seleucid Greeks, there's an internal war that's happening for the heart and soul of what it means to be a Jew. Many people who want to be Greek, because why not? You could be Greek. You don't even have to leave Israel. It doesn't have to be live in Greece. You can bring Greece to here, and you can bring all that culture to here. And forgetting what it is that we were given at Sinai, and forgetting the special role that we have to play in the world. And so that was happening then. And then you see here what was happening now, whether it was antipathy, if you will, for the Jews who have chosen to go back into our biblical homeland, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, who want to be the new pioneers, who want to say we can live in the modern world and also be in these places, and we can make life better for the Arabs who are also in these places. We don't feel that they're our enemy. We want to work together. And a lot of this really, there was a much deeper understanding from what you went through in how we could get to such a horrible position that I hope we never get back to, of that kind of hatred. Even, I was told, even some of the farmers, like in other parts of Israel, supported this because your produce, and I just want to talk for a minute, the produce that came out of Gush Katif, the flowers, the cherry tomatoes, the celery, was selling all over the world. It had the highest level of quality. I remember going into it was in Gadot, I think, going to someone's backyard and eating cherry tomatoes off the vine. And you had to remember to say a blessing over the tomato, because it's impossible to not thank God for that incredible burst in your mouth. It was just like eating, I can't even describe it, when it comes to that. And so, there was just so much great produce coming out of there that perhaps other farmers in Israel felt that it was competition against their produce. And this way, if they're getting rid of the farming communities in Gush Katif, their stuff will sell. And there were so many levels and layers to this. But what really, I mentioned seeing you at the Kotel, what really had me understand that this wasn't going to be good is that they weren't waiting for you. The people that were there all through the battle to keep this from happening, the people that have helped continue afterwards. There is still a drive for Gush Katif brides that is happening here where I live in Efrat 15 years later to help, you know, give the blender, give the oven for the young couples to help them get going. It was all happening from people who didn't want you to leave there to begin with. I would be very happy to be not talking to you on Zoom right now from Netzer, Hazani, but from, you know, going and sitting in the sand with you. And that's when I realized if this was for your own good, because there was terrorism within Gaza, then that was a lie, because then it should have been the left, and it should have been the people that wanted to take you out of their homes that made every effort to resettle you. And as opposed to what happened when Jewish communities were destroyed in Sinai, and as part of the Camp David, the peace treaty with Egypt, in the early 80s, and those people were resettled and given money and homes. There are still people from Gush Katif today living in caravans who still 15 years later don't have a proper home. And one of the things that you mentioned that I think is so important to really emphasize is the importance of community. That you and others realized early on that if you didn't stay together in one shape or form, people were going to collapse, because everybody has their down days. And when you're all together, like a big basket where every fiber is hooked together, you could pick each other up. So a little bit about the community that you rebuilt in Netzer Hazani. Who's living there? Is it everybody from the old community? Is it just people really from Gush Katif who are now living with you in your beautiful new homes in Netzer Hazani Yesodot?
Yeah, the amazing thing is that, first of all, that we had really didn't want to live in this spot. We really wanted to live as close as possible. We tried to look at all different places that were right near the Gaza border, Netivo, different places in the south. But the way it worked out, things rolled around, and you flow with God. That's the way things work. We ended up over here. And when we started building the town, the amazing thing was that it was just an empty field with thorns, and that the town of Yisrael wasn't growing on that year because it was the 7th year, the Shemitah year, and there was just nothing there. And you just had to have vision. You had to have vision and see that it was going to be a new town, and bring the community and convince them that there was going to be a beautiful new town here. And that gave people the hope that they were going to be resettled and build again. Meanwhile, and I say meanwhile because I hope to go home, was in this place. So we are, most of the families from Netzer Hazani. There were about 10 or 12 families that left on the exact date that the government decided that everybody had to leave Gaza. They were each one with his own story of distress or fear, and they left, and they were not in better shape than anyone else. They were in the same mess as everybody else, but they left early, and they ended up living in the Nitzan area in Be'er Ganim, as it's called, for the farming families. But most of the families are living here in Netzer Hazani, and the support of the families that you know for so long, with the same understanding of what happened, that's hard to explain to anyone who doesn't understand. And it's a tremendous support, and this feeling that we have to educate our children towards these same values that brought us to Gush Katif, that kept us going in Gush Katif and helped us survive after we were expelled, is something that's really, really strong. And one thing that we're emphasizing now, these years we have been working on rebuilding the physical part of Netzer Hazani. Today, we're working very hard on rebuilding the ethical and moral part of Netzer Hazani, to make people into givers again. It's not so easy to become a taker when we were left with nothing, but it's not so easy to become a giver again, because once you become a taker, you become an unfortunate person, and we don't want anyone to stay in that position. So we work very hard in helping people being givers, in doing things for communities around us, for other people, for people in Judea and Samaria. When there's God forbid, someone is killed, we're there. We collect money in the community, and we're there bringing things to the people there. So we're working on many different things like that. We're also working on the education of the next generation to yearn for Gush Katif. It's something that's really important to us. And we're glad that there are schools being built here. We live in a wonderful regional council with a mayor who's amazing, who cares about Gush Katif, and also hopes that we'll be able to leave this place and go back there. He'll be behind us and help us, and he helps us here a lot. So we're lucky to have moved to a place where the administration is really backing us. And it's not like the problems have disappeared. There are still people with many, many difficulties difficulties in our community. It's very difficult to talk about Gush Katif. It sounds crazy, but subject is brought up, you see the older people like sort of freeze. It's hard for them to talk about it.
Of
Many
course.
symbols in their houses, they have a picture of the house, a painting of the, but if they can't talk about it, it's very hard. And you know, when we're learning Tanakh, so many times in the Nach, in the history, you see things repeating themselves. It reminds you of what happened in Gush Katif, and you want to say it, and you see that you just mentioned that word and people freeze up. So there are a lot of people still with the trauma. It's not something that goes away. It's passed on from one generation to the other. Yes, there's still trauma and we feel it in the community, but the support of the community is the most amazing part of things. We have very few families that are still farmers, actually. It's not a very profitable business these days, especially in the Corona times where you can't, no hotels and no weddings. There's no, who are you going to still, like how many tomatoes can I eat? Anita Tucker in my house. So the agricultural is a difficult thing, and I think it's a mistake of the state of Israel that it doesn't support agriculture, because all of the agriculture is subsidized, because it's important to keep your agriculture going. You never know what's going to happen, crazy times. So we keep the
to be self-sufficient as much as possible.
So we do try to educate our children to a love of agriculture. We take them to the greenhouses they plant. A lot of the values, we try to keep them up here. So I think that's we also have a community that's made of people of about 19 different original Edot of countries of origin, where their grandparents came from all different countries of the exile. And we all pray together in one synagogue with a special way of praying, so that everybody feels comfortable, and all our children know how to sing the melodies of all the different places of the different exiles, because very soon, hopefully, nobody's going to ask us which exile you came from. They're going to ask you, which tribe are you from? Are you Judah? Are you Yisachar? Are you Levi? Are you Yehuda? So that's what we got to start putting our focus on, and it's part of that big picture of yearning for home.
You know, especially after 1967, but not only, there were many people in Israel who felt like we were hearing the footsteps of Mashiach, right? It was this tremendous miracle, 6 days, and we're back in places, Hebron and Yerushalayim, and all these places that we had yearned for and that were wrested away from us. And here we are. And so Mashiach's around the corner. It's happening. And I think that what happened to you in Gush Katif and the 4 communities, also I do want to mention in northern Shomron, a whole chunk of northern Shomron where people are thrown out of their homes, a very strategic area as well. Is realizing that we're not quite there yet. There's a lot of work that still has to be done. And what I have been inspired by all these years from you, Anita, is that if you and the people who felt it on their basar, like really are the ones who suffered it 15 years ago in ways that can't be undone, can get more involved in Israel. As you said, your daughter, the social worker, and people going into the army. And if there's something wrong here and you love it, you don't run away from it. You work harder to make it right. That we can deserve a time of peace and prosperity, but real peace I'm talking about, not peace because we have a strong army, thank God, but the days that we all hope for, where it will be a different kind of a world, and people will appreciate things in a very different way. So you took yourself out and worked harder, and the community that you have built is an outstanding community. And I'm saying that in the sense not of the houses, which are lovely, but the community. You go, I bring people to you still over the years, and to talk to you, and as you said, to become givers again. Because the natural inclination of the people of Gush Katif was to give. I mean, I remember one of the side things after the expulsion was that suddenly there were restaurants and soup kitchens that didn't have enough fruits and vegetables. And somebody said, what's going on here? And only then did it come out that much of what was being donated to the soup kitchens around Israel was produce that was being given by the farmers in Gush Katif just to make sure that, you were doing, nobody wanted to get rich. Everyone just wanted to put food on the table, and to make sure that Israeli society was okay, was the best it could be, and realizing that there were indigent people around that needed help, and just very quietly, every single day, every single week, making sure that some of those amazing fruits and vegetables that you were growing got to people who couldn't afford it. And so one of the side things is suddenly after the expulsion, where's the coleslaw at the soup kitchen? Well, we didn't get any cabbage because those factories and those production lines are down and those greenhouses have been destroyed. So, it only took until later until people realized what givers you were, always. And absorbing the B'nai Menashe, the Jews who were brought here from Mianpur and all these places who had a connection to Judaism, maybe from a long time ago. Maybe they were one of the 10 tribes that were exiled, and they came to Israel, and they yearned for Jerusalem through all those thousands of years, and they were converted to Judaism and brought here, but they look a little different, right? They look Indian or that. And in Gush Katif, there was no distinction. I remember going there and thinking, like, everybody's just living here together. You talk about your synagogue where everybody prays the same, you've developed your own unique way of praying, even though everybody has different tunes and liturgy. And I remember walking there and thinking, wow, everybody's just here. Everybody's just doing what it is they do and bring whatever skills they have. And as you said at the beginning, you weren't raised to be a farmer in Brooklyn. And if people haven't gotten it yet, Gush Katif was full of sand. So how did you and learning how to, I remember you showing me once a little spindle, I guess it was celery, with it must have had 20 little skinny roots off it. And you said to me, I grow this without water till it's it's shooting out roots everywhere looking for nourishment. And then when it's on the verge of collapse, I put it in the ground and just give it tons of water. And then of course the thing shoots up because it was the roots were already there. And I thought to myself over the years, what a beautiful, beautiful metaphor for what you have done with your life and with your family and with your community. You were brought to the brink of talk about stress, but what you did is shoot out more roots and shoot out more connection so that when the nourishment comes and you bring in the nourishment, the potential is just endless. And I think that celery stalk is just really, in my mind, a picture of what has happened here also on a spiritual level and on an emotional level. And it has been such a difficult road that I don't think people can even begin to understand. But I just want to mention something, and I've spoken to this with groups that I bring here, and some of my listeners have probably heard this already. On the day before the expulsion, which would be the equivalent of today or tomorrow, I was in one of the hothouses watching the cucumbers rot on the vine because nobody was picking them already. And there was an Arab worker in there with me. And I said to him in Hebrew, I said, you must be so happy because there was just the two of us. I said, tomorrow or whatever it is, you're going to get all this. And he said to me, the blessings here came with the Jews and it'll leave with the Jews. We could grow barely maybe some strawberries here until the Jews came and showed us how to grow. And he said, I see that there's a blessing here. I see that there's a direct connection here. And I said to him something so terrible, well, really one of the worst things I've ever said, I think, to a person. I said, how do you know that? You're a Muslim, not a Jew. He taught me such a big lesson that day. He said, what does it matter if I pray to Allah and you pray to Elohim? So there's some of us who see God's hand in the world, and I do. And I see that there's a special and deep connection between God, the land of Israel, and the Jewish people. And that's what happened here in Gush Katif. And he really humbled me with what he said, because he was so right. He was so right. We don't have a lock on the truth at all. And anybody who's connected to God and sees his hand in the world understands the bigger picture that's happening here. Doesn't always understand it, but understands perhaps the role that we have to play. He was later killed, incidentally, I found out, because he had been friends with the Jews, because he had worked with the Jews. He said to me, if I'm sick, the owner of this, my boss sends me soup. And when I make a wedding, they all come and dance with me. He said, we know how to live together here, despite our differences in religion. I mean, this was a true man of God. And he didn't survive because people who pretend to be men of God or jihadists came and ruined the good that was there in so many ways. Anyway, Anita, anything that you'd like to add before I let you go on your day?
Right, and I feel that we were privileged to live in Gush Katif, because when you see it that way, that it was a privilege to live in Gush Katif, that we saw the blessing of God in that the sand dunes that the Arabs told us was a cursed land, nobody lived there since Abraham and Isaac, turned into a place of that everything was growing beautifully, and we were able to give charity to the needy. It's true, the charities came to our greenhouses without stop, and we found that the more we gave to charity, the more blessing we had in our greenhouse. So there were so many things that we had the privilege of seeing, that and privilege of seeing miracles when the rockets fell and no one was hurt. I mean, it was like amazing things. So I think it was a privilege to live in Gaza, in Gush Katif, and that makes the yearning even stronger. And I say that also to people that are considering Aliyah and considering to come to live in Israel, because when you realize that not everyone has the privilege of living in Israel, and you say it that way all the time, not
That's right.
privilege of living in Israel. I'm grateful for the privilege that I have of living in Israel. I'm grateful for the privilege that I have of living in Gush Katif, and I wish that more people will be blessed with that privilege and will realize it and want to come on Aliyah, want to live in every part of the land of Israel, and that we will live from the Chidekel, from the river of the Chidekel, down to the Dekalim in the south,
Right.
and the land of Israel. So I think that's the feeling that you have, that it's a privilege to live here, and it's was a privilege to live in Gush Katif. We saw so many beautiful miracles and things, and God willing, our great-grandchildren will get to see it too.
Please God, Bezrat Hashem. I have 4 plants in my house that I bought in the nursery in Atzmona, which was the biggest plant nursery in the Middle East, used to export to everywhere. And I bought them, probably 18, 19, 20 years ago. And those plants get such good care, because one day I am taking them back and I'm gonna give them to somebody who lives there, or maybe one of my children or grandchildren will live there, and they're gonna go back home as well. So it's my little thing that I'm doing, that I look at every single day and think about the roots and think about the soil and think about the difficulties. But you're right, it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege. There's a lot of work to do, but when you care about something deeply, then you do the work. If, some of us have children who aren't perfect, needed care in one way or the other, physical, emotional, whatever it is. We didn't abandon them because we love them. We got them the best care and we put in the most effort, because that's the test of true love. And so the tremendous love that we have for this country, despite some of the major flaws in leadership, and not just leadership, and things that they have to be fixed. And the way to do that, if you care, is to come here and be a part of fixing it. And there is no greater feeling than being able to do that. You can just be handed something, or you can work hard for it. And I think all of us over the age of 4 know the difference in between working hard for something and the difference in appreciation when you have it, and just being handed something. And this most definitely has not been handed to us. And there are times where the silver platter has fallen and spilled everything on it. 15 years ago was one of those times. You picked it up. And I don't know if you realize, Anita, what you have done for the rest of us who didn't suffer the way you have suffered. Because if you can do this, then how can the rest of us not? And if you can keep your community together and your family together, then the rest of us have no excuse whatsoever. And so for that, I want to thank you. And just, I wanted my listeners to hear you today also, and just think about what happened 15 years ago, how it can never happen again, but we have to make sure that it doesn't. And work hard towards getting you home again with a whole lot of other people who will join you, as I'm sure. So thank you so much. You should have an easy fast. And it should be, as we say, it should be the last time that we fast on Tisha B'Av, because the day should be a joyous one. But it's going to take some work. It's not just going to fall from the sky at all. Okay, Anita Tucker of Netzer Hazani, in the interim, till she goes back to the real Netzer Hazani. Thank you so much for joining me today. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. You can, of course, write to me, eve@thelandofisrael.org. And if you have something that you want to say to Anita, you can certainly send it to me. I'll pass it on to her. and you can stay connected with this extraordinary woman, really extraordinary woman who I'm honored to call a friend. Okay, everyone, be safe from corona, from car accidents, from whatever it is. Just stay low in all ways, and we will all get through what's a difficult time for the planet. Specifically this period for the Jewish people, but it's not so great for the planet right now either. So take care, everybody, and goodbye for now.